I'm going to pour. I brought the pink in for fun. I'm very keen on pink anyway. An exercise that I often do as well is asking people to think of their creative hero. Fashion is such a cheeky industry for just this little stack of Duplo is something I use to do colour breathing.
Curious Conversations.
So for this Curious Conversations podcast, we're joined by an award-winning author, entrepreneur, professor, doctor, researcher, fashion designer, keynote speaker, expert in sustainable and ethical fashion, and one of Sustainability X's magazine's Global 50 Women in Sustainability. So welcome to Curious Conversations, Natascha Radclyffe-Thomas.
Hi, thank you very much.
No problem.
For having me.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, why you have a passion for curiosity, creativity and innovation, please?
Yeah, sure. I think if you're a creative person, for me, I'm going to talk about making.
Yep.
You're always interested in making and how other people make. So I suppose my alignment with creativity came more through my own interest in fashion as a teenager. It was a big part of my identity.
Yep.
And I didn't formally learn to sew, so I taught myself.
Oh, well done.
And I think that curiosity then is, how are things made? How do I make this? And then through that, I got really interested in things like history of fashion and that type of thing. So I think and that's kind of extended itself. You know, how do things work? How do we put things together? How does this material work? So I think that's sort of a basis of it. Then later, as an educator, I got very interested in how we learn, and specifically how we learn about creativity. Yeah. And that fueled my curiosity into studying that. And I did a doctorate looking at cross-cultural creativity.
I saw that, very good. So as we do at the start of every podcast, we ask one of our guests to do a fun, hands-on challenge to create something imaginative, showing how play can fuel creativity and things like that. So, Natascha, here's some Lego. So what we want you to do is create something that represents your passion for creativity, curiosity and innovation.
Oh my God.
So you are free to do what you want with it. So you can either pour it out, you can use it there. We'll take probably about 5 minutes or so to go through it, and then...
I'm going to pour.
Yeah.
Great.
So one of the things, part of our Curious Conversations, Curious Minds things, we've got these boxes in every single office.
That is wonderful.
To help people to... be a bit more curious and play effectively.
And do they?
Yeah, I think so. Some people do. And also one of the questions we'll come on to is around whether people lose their curiosity and creativity as they get older. It's interesting. There's quite a few of our, I suppose, my older colleagues who are more like, why is a Lego in here? I'm not going to play with it, etc. Until they actually start playing with it.
Yes.
And then it does fuel conversations. And we've had have had some interesting looking models built, and we stick them on our weekly roundup in the business, which is quite interesting. But it's like, I suppose, slightly a fun way of playing with things.
Definitely.
And we're starting to do a little bit more Lego related things with some social enterprises as well, as part of our...
That's brilliant.
Some of our local CSR social value work. So
I feel like I'm done.
You done?
I feel like I'm done.
So Natascha, so you've finished now. So do you want to give an explanation about what you've created and some of the inspiration behind it, please?
Yeah, so I am actually really driven by colour. So it's one of the things I find difficult with the Lego. I don't like putting colours together that I don't like together. But because I'm really blue and white today, this is like representing me. Yeah. And I thought I'll bring the blue and white in. I brought the pink in for fun. I'm very keen on pink anyway. Yeah. But a bit of fun. And I wanted to be multiple headed to show, that I have lots of ideas around creativity. Academic ideas, practical ideas, and I wanted to have the transparency to be like looking through things and trying to understand inside them. And then this sort of strange shape here was just about like reaching out and kind of finding out what's going on in the world.
Any reason why you've made it a little bit higher?
I think it was more like to do this elevation and having like a view over things. and just getting an overview, because I think if I'm thinking about anything, I always want to have an overview of what's going on.
Very good.
But it's quite early in the morning to do this. So
I know,
thank you for the
sorry
challenge.
about that. So as we go through, if you go, I want to change that, I want to amend it, feel free to play about with it. It's no problem. So as this, we'll jump into the questions now. So as this podcast called Curious Conversations, one of the things I'd like to start with is a question on curiosity. So as we get older, do you think we forget how to be curious?
That's such an interesting question when I saw that. I'm not sure that it's that we forget, but I think it's just not really sanctioned. I think there's a whole thing about when you're a child, you're encouraged to be curious. And then there's some kind of age, which maybe is not nominal, that people just decide, well, that's the end of being curious, and you're sort of in your partition, and that's kind of how we think. So I think some people keep that curiosity in terms of their hobbies, things like reading or travel, but maybe they don't have it in their work lives so much.
I think it's quite hard, and I think getting the Lego out does help people to be a bit more curious, actually. And I think maybe people don't feel like they're being curious, and sometimes you need to be told you're being curious, or your curiosity is through learning something new, reading something new, or things like that. And it's quite when we first introduced the word curious minds into RLB, there was quite a lot of, I suppose, curiosity about why we chose that, but it is around making people think about different things and think outside of what they normally think about.
Yeah, so I think sometimes people find it a bit of a threat.
Yes.
Am I going to do it right?
Yeah.
And I guess the whole idea about being curious is it can be quite risky. So I guess personality-wise, if you're someone who's risk-averse and you want to follow the rules, what's the rule for this? Like, what's the rule for making this model? How am I going to be judged? And we don't want to appear silly. Sometimes, or especially as adults, we don't want to appear silly.
We've and one of the things that we've seen, one of the themes that's come out from these podcasts is around failure, and how failure, and you'll come with this from all your entrepreneur stuff and innovation, things like that. Failure is not a bad word, but whereas in the professional industry, I suppose somewhere like where we work, it's failure isn't seen as a positive word.
Yeah,
I think
it's really difficult because people accept, I think, that the possibility of failure is something inherent in creating something, but it's not actually rewarded. I mean, nobody, in your industry would go, oh, it's amazing, I know that building fell down or something, that's great.
Yeah.
So I think it's just really difficult how we might talk about things, but then actually the messages that we actually receive. And I think a lot of that is about the difference between how people think about the process and the product of creating something, or of being sort of that curiosity along the way, and whether you're allowed to explore and go off and diverge and come back again.
Maybe it's like you said, it's the connotations and it's the word. If you say actually what you're doing is learning and not failing, people would be a bit more accepting of it, I think. And ultimately failure is a way of learning, isn't it? It's also
a kind of cultural. I mean, if you look in terms of creativity and the creative arts, quite a lot of, say, I'm going to be very broad here, but in the West, a lot of our art is about kind of revolution, experimentation, messing things up. And then, again, speaking very broadly, in other cultures, you might have much more of the ideal finished product. And we don't want to see the mess behind the scenes. So I think there's a lot of that which we absorb, and if we don't vocalise it, you don't even know that that's how you're feeling about something.
Which is quite a nice segue from my next question, actually. So we as an organisation, we're a UK and global organisation with people from very diverse backgrounds and cultures. And obviously one of your experiences around intercultural creative education, which is quite a mouthful. So what tips would you give for fostering creativity and innovation through understanding and appreciating and nurturing different cultures?
Yeah, so I think one thing to understand is that even the idea of what creativity isn't fixed, and there's multiple kind of conflicting and complementary definitions. So I think and the whole thing about intercultural education and communication is not necessarily that you know everybody else's opinions about things, but that you understand they may be different and there isn't a fixed thing. And that can also go in terms of culture of industries. What someone thinks is creative in one industry is different. So one thing I think is actually to be quite explicit about those things, to actually engage in a bit of kind of metacognition, thinking about how do we think about things, and even discussing, having those questions. Is it product? Is it process? Where's the creativity sit? And then also our understanding of what creativity is. Do we mean big C creativity, kind of really groundbreaking initiatives? Or are we talking about everyday creativity? So I think just having conversations around creativity, but also being sensitive to the things I've just alluded to, that some people culturally may feel more uncomfortable with exposing things like mistakes. Really interesting when I was doing my research, which was into kind of Confucian heritage cultures and creativity. The word in Chinese for question is the same as a problem.
Okay,
so in a sense, if you're asking someone a question, you may be giving them a problem.
Yeah.
So even things like that. And I think if, maybe in the UK and North America, we're used to a lot of, we don't mind challenge.
Yeah.
We don't mind saying, I don't know. Let's have a think about that. There might be other cultures where you would lose a lot of face by admitting that you didn't maybe have the answer, which means that people in that culture wouldn't ask the question.
Yeah.
So I think there's just all sorts of sensitivities. But generally, I think humans are more similar than we are different.
Yeah.
So maybe having these kind of more less risky activities and discussing. And actually I did bring a prop. When I've talked about cross-cultural creativity, I actually made a card which is, what is your recipe for creativity?
Oh, nice.
And I've done this in workshops. I've got a list here of a ton of the sort of attributes, you can have a look if you like, that are associated with creativity that comes from the literature, and then asking people to say, well which of these do you think are really key? So it's got little stickers for creativity, and which do you think are absolutely not relevant? And even doing an exercise like that could be really interesting to actually generate people's ideas about that.
So what did you find when you've given this to people? Have you found, did the results surprise you, or did you see more commonality than you actually expected?
I think you actually get a lot of commonality, but I think what it also shows is that things can be culturally based, but they're also individually based, and as I say, discipline. So even within creative arts, fashion, architecture, photography might have really different ideas about what are the key essential elements of creativity.
Yeah, cool. So one of the things I listened to a podcast, and they did an experiment around, I think they did an experiment about the internet and things like that, about innovation. One of the things they found is the people who went forward and chose a different internet search engine. So instead of going with a Microsoft one, which comes as standard, they went for Google or Firefox or something else, were the most creative people as a consequence. So obviously people are looking for what's the easiest way of doing things, trying something out, trying an iterative process, and so it was quite an interesting when it
shows up in different ways.
Yes, and you like ask your students, so which search engine you use, and you go, you're creative, and maybe you aren't.
But I think even you saying that goes to such a big thing about how we judge creativity. And that was really one of the elements behind my doctoral research, because educators and people in professions, we're kind of gatekeepers for creativity because we're judging what is creative. And in a kind of global either work environment or an education environment, it's so important to understand that people may have different measures of creativity, and actually understanding what that is, and to make sure that we're kind of representing those and having diverse ideas about what is creative.
And I suppose asking them as well. Like you said, with your recipe, it's about understand and the cultural differences, understanding what's your measure of whether you are being creative or not being creative.
Exactly. And an exercise that I often do as well is asking people to think of their creative hero or shero.
Okay.
And that's really interesting, because some people will have, I don't know, like Einstein might be something. Someone maybe in fashion might go, Vivienne Westwood.
Yeah.
Someone might go, my auntie, because they do all of these. And that's a really interesting way of using people telling stories about an individual they identify as being creative.
Who's your one?
Oh, gosh. I quite like Jean-Paul Gaultier in terms of fashion and creativity, and also his kind of respect and interest in other cultures. So he's someone who's always been interested in travel. He's been interested in nomadic peoples. He's been interested in history, taken all of those elements and turned them into some sometimes quite challenging fashion, but always a bit playful.
Yeah, very good. I must also ask other people. That was one of my questions, actually.
Yay.
So one of the things you talk about creativity. So obviously you're a very creative person. So wondering is, how do you overcome creative blocks, and are there anything, techniques or tools or something that you do that you can share with listeners?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when we think about creativity, again, it's often quite abstract, and we often feel like there isn't really, a recipe or a technique. But if you're in something like design, there are methods that you go through that are kind of normally getting some inspiration, doing some research, generating a lot of ideas, and then kind of narrowing them down. And interestingly, when I was working in the States, I attended the International Center for Studies in Creativity, which comes out of Buffalo, New York, and they have a creative problem-solving sort of methodology, and you can get sort of tested to see what kind of creative problem solver you are. And the stages for that are very kind of similar. And what was interesting to me is the first stage that they talk about is clarifying. So clarifying, then kind of ideating, then developing, and then implementing and evaluating. So it's kind of interesting. They do this almost like personality thing to see what kind of person are you. And when I first went there, everyone's like, hey, I'm an ideator or I'm a clarifier. And that's interesting as well, slightly going back to your question before. If people have different traits in their creativity and in their creative problem solving, they can annoy each other, because if I'm desperately trying to clarify, but you're trying to ideate, we're kind of clashing right at the beginning. But in terms of the actual question, I think going for a walk is one of the things that really helps me, especially if I'm trying to write, or if I've got some kind of thorny issue, I'm not quite sure which side I'm going down on. So actually going for a walk is great. But what tends to happen is you go for a walk, you get all these genius ideas, but actually you need to capture them, because otherwise you get back and you're like, oh, I had 6 great ideas and now I've lost 4 of them. But I actually think that moving, or even just going into a different space, I'm very sensitive to kind of the atmosphere and the environment. And I think if you're kind of stuck in one space, just literally moving yourself into another space often helps kind of shift.
Yeah, and I suppose interesting that one of the things I think I found during the pandemic, when everyone was working from home, and I suppose now, obviously, we have flexible working where we can work from home or work. Once you're at home for a while, you do need to move, go somewhere else. So I've taken up to going into a coffee shop and getting a bit of background noise.
Yes,
it helps. I suppose refresh you a little bit.
Yes, and just something a bit surprising and just element. But obviously, literally going for a walk is getting your blood pumping, so you're feeding your brain with that. But you're going to see something, and it's going to, your synapses are going to snap and you get new ideas.
I've had the probably the best ideas and thought stuff is when I've been for a run. Yeah. So I think it's through oxygenation as well.
Definitely.
But the problem is I don't take my phone with me, so I'm going to have to try and remember it all the way.
Or take a scribe who can run behind you writing down your genius ideas.
That's a great idea, Might cost me a bit of money, but it's probably a good idea actually. So, I think that fresh air, oxygenation, going somewhere different, and I think, like I said, blood moving is quite a way of getting your brain thinking a bit more.
And I think just those, I had a really bad slip disc a few years ago, and I really couldn't sit. So, and I often then used to just have to walk to have a meeting. Yeah. People found that really challenging, but actually just walking, having a meeting, having a conversation really changes your perspective. I mean, literally, if you're stood up, but, also just means you have you're not kind of stuck in that way. Yeah,
one of the things we tried to do every so often is have walking meetings.
Great.
Instead of having it in a meeting room, like a day like today is obviously a nice day, going out and having a walk around and doing it is quite a nice.
Yeah.
And you can stop and have coffee, and it's a bit nicer than sitting in a stuffy room, or like most of our meetings now are on Teams, so you'd looking at a screen all day long. So
that's probably one of the least creative ways of working.
It is, and one of the things I suppose when you find is that you don't have those water cooler moments where you between meetings, before meetings, like when we're walking across here, having the conversation, how are you, and developing those personal relationships. It doesn't happen on Teams. It's you're meeting from this time to this time.
Yes, it's definitely harder. So you probably have to build that in if you want to have some deliberate strategies to try and develop that.
It's quite difficult in that sort of environment where you're trying to develop personal relationships, but it is just a screen. People turn the cameras off, turn the cameras on.
Yes, one of my colleagues that I do some work with, which we might talk about later, often puts up one of those screens with pictures of sheep on. Yeah. Which sheep are you today at the beginning of a meeting? And that at least breaks the ice a little bit.
Which one's the angry sheep today?
I'm always the one with the mad hair.
So one of the questions is around imitation as the sincerest form of flattery. It's obviously pertinent particularly in a world like ours where people are very, very busy and don't really have the headspace and time to think about new ideas and things like that. So in your experience, how do you differentiate between innovation and inspiration? Or imitation, and inspiration.
That's really interesting. I mean, fashion is such a cheeky industry for just, copy-paste.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question for me. I think something is about the intention. So there's one bit which I think is kind of more philosophical about how we think about creativity. Yeah. And in the 18th century, we had this idea that was much more like big C creativity, and it was all about originality. 19th century had a slightly more scientific approach, and it was more kind of about adaptability and maybe development and change. And 20th century, we've understood much more about the context that something exists within. So I think, first of all, a bit of clarifying about what's the purpose. I mean, if you're saying you're designing a dress and you've got the same basic human form, there's no need to reinvent lots of things. And you can normally start with some kind of model or template or block or a pattern piece. But I think it's where you go to then enhance that. And that's the joy of kind of inspiration, is looking at what other people have done. But in fashion, what we try to do, which is probably useful for other industries, is not to look at fashion for inspiration. Because if you only look at something that exists in your industry, it's very hard for that not just to be a copy. So, for example, people look at flowers, don't they? And then they make beautiful textiles. You might go out and look at architecture. That's often something that inspires fashion design, and look at different 3D kind of shapes. But I think a lot of it is the intention. And I think it's what's a shame. I'm not sure if you've ever seen any of the documentaries about the ultra-fast fashion companies. That whole idea of being inspired, having a development sheet, having a mood board, just gone. It's just grab, what's the algorithm like? And I think that's such a risk in many industries, because you're only then feeding on the thing that's already popular, which by default may not be that interesting.
Yeah, and I suppose you do see things in the news around how some of the expensive high-end fashion has been effectively copied and pasted but with some, I suppose, because they don't have the budget, they don't have the materials, it is a cheap imitation of it. But I suppose, to a certain extent, it makes fashion a bit more affordable sometimes as well. Yeah. Although it's and I will come on to it around sustainability, it is a single use. They are sort of single use type.
Yeah, I mean, I think in any kind of design, this always happens. There's always like the gold star of design, whether that's architecture, painting, fashion, textiles, and they will naturally be imitated if they're popular and people are aspiring to have that, and you get that kind of historically that trickle down kind of effect. So in a sense, yes, that's a natural part of human creativity to look, but I think it's the intention whether you're trying to whether you're trying to add anything, develop something. And I think especially in fashion, but also in lots of other areas, do we need more stuff? So if you're then designing a product, let's have a reason to have that product that's more than just trying to churn cash, which is my kind of idea around ultra fast fashion. It's not fashion, it's not design, it's about churning cash.
One of the things, and I suppose that's very similar to sort of thing we look at in terms of a building. A lot of clients look at the cost of building the building, but actually the cost of maintaining it and the whole life cost of that asset, whatever it might be, is actually, if you look at that, you make very different decisions at the beginning. So it's a bit like, I suppose, from a fashion perspective, if you buy, I suppose it's me paraphrasing maybe a little bit, but buy expensive piece of clothing that lasts a longer time is cheaper than buying 100 different pieces of items, which iteratively replace that one that could have been.
I mean, there's a lot about investing in quality. Not everybody has access to very expensive clothing or building or cars or anything. But definitely, I mean, there's that famous thing about how it's very expensive to be poor, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, but I think, as I think it's the intention that goes behind something. And I think what's a shame now is seeing sort of whole industries almost not even understanding that there is a design process, that there is skill in design, and we're seeing that a lot with AI and creativity, whether that's in the form of writing or whether that's in the form of imagery. And I think it's a real challenge for creativity and for creatives to see that kind of is almost dismissed.
Yeah. So one of the things we just touched on is around sustainability. So we recently published our annual global report highlighting sustainability as one of the key issues in particularly the construction and property industry. So given your experience around sustainability and circular economy, what role does innovation play in how we can approach the UN SDGs and sustainability and climate as a whole?
That's a very big question.
I know, sorry, yeah.
First of all, I'm really glad to hear.
Can you solve it?
Yeah.
Can you solve
First of all, I'm really
crisis?
glad to hear that you are kind of endorsing that, because construction is, does create a lot of terrible sort of damages, both environmentally and socially. And it's often a little bit ignored. I think things like fashion, as bad as it can be, just gets beaten over the head with it because it's quite accessible. I think construction people just don't really understand what the materials are and what the impacts are. So I think the first thing is actually understanding what the impacts are and what the end results of decisions are. And you've just kind of talked about that in terms of maintaining a building and this idea of cheap and cost. And I guess if you look to the fashion side, Fashion Revolution, an activist NGO asks, who made my clothes, and that kind of thing. And also we had the documentary several years ago now, kind of the true cost. So I think if you take the approach of trying to really understand what's the supply chain, who's involved in that, what are the impacts along that, and then what through the usage, and we're obviously always trying to think about the people side as well as the environmental kind of side. And I think also in construction, I'm sure there is a lot of waste, and that's the same as fashion. So there's a lot of textile waste, and you'll be the same, where there's pre-consumer waste. There's a lot of waste before anything's actually even built, and then there's the waste at the sort of end of life. And I guess that's why it's really nice to start thinking about how do you innovate in terms of, well, first of all, so passive design, so that you're using nature and elements in the design, but also what's happening at the end of a life, or how can you extend the life of a building. So I mean, there's been debates in the press, haven't there, in London, thinking about Marks and Spencer's on Oxford Street, this kind of thing of, can't we reuse buildings? And when we see that, we're in a space here today that's a kind of reuse building. And I think those sorts of things are really interesting to investigate. I think in terms of circularity, that's all about designing for end of life. Trying to use materials that are less damaging, and in some sense trying to kind of separate the I suppose the finances from just using up lots and lots of resources. But the circular economy has, it is an economic system, so I think we have to try and understand, well, what are the costs and what are the benefits, that they can't just be speculative, because, your clients will have shareholders and they need to see a reward on the profit and loss sheet, basically. So I think one of the things is it's really complex. In terms of the SDGs, although they're all interrelated, I think sometimes it's good to really identify what are the ones you could have the most impact on, and try for it not just to be a kind of marketing communications thing, because it's quite easy sometimes to do things, I don't know, we're not going to use plastic cups or something, and you can have all of those, but what's going to create the really meaningful change in your industry? Where can you be a leader? Where can you encourage others to follow you? Maybe making some more difficult decisions that are sometimes about what you don't do rather than what you do.
Do you think there's an issue around the and you touched on it a minute ago, around education of the general public around these sort of things? So I think sometimes, particularly in the construction industry, we see things around wastage of money, or that the general public don't see it, or they only read about it through general press, popular press. So I think it's the same with fashion as well, around that. Well,
a couple of years ago, I was part of an exercise that the United Nations Global Compact UK did, which was looking at, where is the UK in terms of achieving the SDGs, which, if we remember, we're supposed to be trying to achieve them by 2030, which seems scarily close now. And one of the elements, I was specifically looking at SDG 12, which is about responsible production and consumption. And one of the areas of that is actually education. And it did show that, yes, the general public has quite a low level of understanding about what sustainability is and the complexities. And I think a lot of people have got more on board with that through people like David Attenborough. We talk about the Attenborough effect, and people like Greta Thunberg, who have highlighted some specific issues. But it's hard for people, because there's such massive problems, it's hard for people to understand how they can actually affect them as an individual. And I think also we're often made to feel that it is kind of our fault in terms of our individual choices, in which case we might end up throwing our hands up and going, well, I just simply don't know. Because if we're trying to be more sustainable, thinking about waste, we actually need the infrastructure to deal with that. So if you're having a building site or something, you need the infrastructure to deal with the waste. You need to be able to, if you want to reuse materials, you need to have the skills to do that. If you want to use maybe some more sustainable materials, you need the infrastructure to bring those in and the skills for people to actually work with them. And that's exactly the same, with fashion. So often I think we've been lulled into a sense of kind of falsehood through recycling, because we all think about, we'll chuck that in the recycling bin and something magical will happen with it. And okay, that can happen with things like glass. That's fairly easy. But lots of other materials, it really, really isn't an option. I'm sure there's lots of things in construction that doesn't work for, and definitely in fashion. We shouldn't be thinking about just recycling our clothing as an option, really.
Upcycling, maybe?
Upcycling for sure. And I guess that's the same, with building materials, and just having those ways of people actually accessing, materials and being able to use them again. But I think we do need more general and that kind of education that's more fun as well, not telling us off, because people really don't want to be told off about their choices as well.
No, and I think the popular thing you hear is that you are impacting your children's future, isn't it? That's the general, you hear that quite a lot.
Yes.
What you're doing is impacting your children's future, and they're not going to have a future, and blah 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 blah. So you do feel very guilty about what you do.
Yes, and I think sometimes you can get stuck in that kind of panic state as well, because lots of decisions are made at governmental level and or global corporations, and also the impact of a few billionaires is so much greater than we're having.
Or
so it can be easy.
Trade tariffs.
Yes, it can be. It can be easy to just think, well, I can't do anything, so I won't do anything. But then that also makes you have this kind of eco anxiety, and a lot of younger people are having that kind of eco anxiety. And interestingly, coming back to creativity is one of the things that can help kind of alleviate concerns around sustainability. So actually being involved in creative practices and making things is actually something, we've done some research around that, especially working with your hands can help you feel better about some of these kind of great challenges that we have in the world.
Hopefully the Lego made you feel a bit better this morning. So one of my final questions around how innovations obviously help shape the environment around us and how we interact with it. And one of the reasons we started the Curious Conversation podcast is to get different people's perspectives from different industries. Obviously, you're very much around fashion and education. So I suppose if you had a crystal ball, and from your perspective and what you see in the world, what do you think our future built environment looks like or feels like, or how you'd interact with it?
Wow. I'm not sure what it will look like, but I could have some ideas about what I'd like, maybe. I mean, I love cities. So even though I think a lot of people with sustainability always just think outside, but I think, and in London, I love London, and we're so lucky to have a lot of, trees and nature. So I think that relationship between our buildings and the outside is a really important thing. I already mentioned the kind of idea of that kind of passive design. So it'd be really nice that we considered more of that. How do we make use of the wind, the sun, things like kind of solar glass? I think those kind of initiatives are really interesting. I'd love to see the cherishing of historic materials and techniques. So I'm involved with the Costume Society. We've partnered with Heritage Crafts, and they actually support a lot of innovation and support young people, not just young people getting into crafts around, plastering in historical ways, and bricklaying using wood materials. So I think it would be really nice to see those respected and elevated, and for people who are makers to be paid and respected, so that we can actually celebrate that. This is extremely unlikely to happen, but I'd like to see that happen.
I'd probably disagree with that, principally because I suppose we've seen the rise of artisan, particularly around food.
Yes.
Actually, it's got. I suppose if you look 5-10 years ago, you wouldn't have said we'd have artisan bakers, artisan coffee makers everywhere, and things like that. So I think that type of thing could happen, I think.
Yes, well, I hope there is a renaissance of that. I'd really like to see that, because also I think a lot of people really get satisfaction from doing that kind of work and working with their hands, and to have the respect of that. It's something that we really kind of lost, and it's something that, London and the UK broadly is known for throughout the world, but it's something that it's almost not invested in or not recognised, and it just sort of bubbles up and happens, which is great in one way, but it'd be really nice that more people had access to that sort of thing. So those are the sorts of areas I'd like to see developing.
Sort of thing that people expect to see until it's not there, and they go, why isn't it there? And you go, well, because nobody invested in it, by the way. So
exactly.
So that's really good. So I see you've got some other couple of things. Do you want to tell us about what you've got here?
Yeah, I'm just going to say really quickly. So this, when you were saying about mental blocks as well,
Yeah.
or even actually thinking about creativity, this little stack of Duplo is something I use to do colour breathing.
Yeah.
And actually you could use it in your Teams meetings. So colour breathing is come from a great woman called Momtaz who does colour therapy.
Yeah.
And you get people to choose a colour,
Yeah.
close their eyes and breathe that colour in for a minute.
Interesting.
And then see how they respond.
Yeah.
It's a really nice way of bringing everyone into a space.
Yeah.
So you forget all of your external things. I brought that
I like
back.
that. Yeah.
I brought this because one of the elements that I use a lot in my teaching is case studies to generate creativity. I often look at sustainable aspects. And when I was working with some business students, so nothing to do with fashion, I'll do a very quick version of the story. I was talking about textile waste, this big global problem, and then saying, a lot of this is because, a button falls off, people don't know how to mend their clothing. Ask the class who knows how to sew on a button, only a few of them did. So I introduced an activity to sew on a button as part of their assessment. And then I've often done that in different, I might have done it with you today, brought a needle and thread. And that element of surprise and play, like the Lego, is something that also really sticks with people. And it also is this idea of rippling, that you can have a really tiny object or a really tiny story, and then the impact of that can really spread around there.
Nice.
And this I brought because one of the projects I've been involved with over the last 3 years comes from the United Nations supported initiative PRIME, and it's all about teaching sustainability in business schools and broader. And actually it's working, interestingly, with the learnings from the Lego Foundation, all about how we learn through playfulness. So it really aligns with everything that you've been doing here. And interestingly, just to come back to your Lego, recently I actually trained as a Lego Series Play facilitator in the area of climate specifically. So that's a new... That was a kind of world first when that happened with a great woman called Lucy.
The Lego is a Lego Series Play introduction kit. And we do Lego Series Play in some of our meetings as well. And we've had 2 people on the podcast so far. One who uses Lego as part of their social enterprise. They're a chief executive of a social enterprise that do stuff with schools. And then the other person's a Lego Series Play facilitator as well. So it's interesting. When we first thought about it, introducing Lego, I spoke to one of our board members and they said, we do it all the time.
Brilliant.
And it's interesting. There is a flow down about the use of Lego from the very, very top to now people seeing it in the meeting rooms. We're doing some social value, social enterprise stuff in our regions as well. So it's quite an interesting way of using it. And I suppose we have to thank Lego Foundation for their inspiration to help us do it. So.
Yeah, and I think it's that permission to play is very important, isn't it, for creativity and curiosity.
Definitely. So that concludes some of our questions. So was there anything you'd like to tell our listeners about any exciting projects you're currently working on?
Yeah, well, I think the Impactful 5 project, which is the work that I've been doing with PRIME, so that stands for Principles for Responsible Management Education. I've been doing that for about 3 years and continue to do that. And it's really great because I'm working with educators all around the world, understanding how we could learn through play, but how we implement that specifically to address challenges of sustainability. So that's a really interesting project that's sort of ongoing.
Yeah,
I'm excited about that.
Super. So as a thank you, we'd like to make a donation about £500 to a charity of your choice. So would you like to tell us who the charity is and why you've chosen them? Please?
Yes. So I'm going to nominate the Costume Society. I mentioned them earlier. I'm their vice chair, but I will not benefit from this in any way. And we are the world's longest established charity supporting the study of historical and also contemporary dress. And one of our areas that this funding will go towards is supporting young people who are trying to start out in the areas of costume design and making.
Do you have a website or anything for them?
We do. We're the Costume Society.
.uk
something.
Just Google
you
it.
look for the Costume Society, you'll find us. We're on Instagram and all the other
and is it
places.
A national charity or?
Yes, it's the UK's charity for historical dress, but also as they investing. And we've just got this really exciting partnership over the last couple of years with Heritage Crafts, which really aligns with my. I really believe in that idea of cultural heritage has to be something that's living. So that it's not just stuck in a museum, it's not just historical practice, it's actually how do we keep these going? And there's a lot of people who want to work in the fashion, textiles, accessories making areas who just need that little boost, whether it's some training or a bit of funding to get them going. So we support a whole bunch of awards around that, and some, as I say, with heritage crafts that are open now, actually.
Brilliant.
If anyone
That's
looks at those.
So that's been brilliant. Thanks for coming along today, Natascha, and sharing some of your incredible stories and how some of the fashion industry does align quite closely, actually, with what we do around construction as well, which is interesting. So, and I suppose when I first started this, obviously trying to get interesting people, and you're obviously a very interesting person, very creative. I didn't appreciate how those two linkages would be, but it's been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on Curious Conversations.
Cheers. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Curious Conversations.